Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I am Mr. Kadim Khan and I am a lecturer in the Institute of Computing, Kuwait University of Science and Technology. Today we will take lecture number 16 of the subject of software engineering, in which we will discuss software requirement engineering. This is the discussion agenda. It contains the topics of requirements, software requirements engineering. Then we have the types of software requirements, in which we have the non-functional requirements, functional requirements, and the domain requirements. Now, what is the requirements? Requirements is in fact a high level abstract statement or a high level abstract document which contains the services for which the systems should be developed. So it is the abstract statement of a service or a system constraints. Both are the same. Services are the system constraints mean that all sort of the user needs and system business needs, which can be in the format of the detailed mathematical functional specification. So all the requirements must be in the format such as the functional specification, but using the mathematical notations. So these are called the user requirements. In simple words, the requirements are also called user needs. That why user is interested to develop the software, or what are the business goal of the user, that what sort of services the user wants from the software. So all these statements are called requirements. Now requirements may be served as a dual function. Dual function means requirements can serve for the two different objectives. Number one, it may be the basis for a bid for a contract. Basis for the bid for the contract means that all the requirements are considered for the bid for the contract. For example, if the requirements are very much large, that means that the size of the software should also be very much large. So that's why the contract should be also very much expensive. And if the requirements are not much in the detail and not much too much, that means requirements are very much small. So then the software size will be also very much small. So that's why contract will also be not so much big. That will be a small contract. Therefore, must be open to interpretation. That means contract must be open for the interpretation. Interpretation means that for the negotiation. The contract must be ready for the negotiation between different parties. May be the basis for the contract itself. All the requirement acts as like the contract itself. That means that once the requirements specification document, that is the SRS document, is properly signed by the customers and the developer, then that act as an agreement and that cannot be changed later on. So the contract must be signed between the two parties and the requirements act as a contract for itself. Therefore, it must be defined in detail. Both these statements may be called the requirements. So the above both statements, that is bid for the contract and contract itself, are called the requirements. Now, requirements engineering, it is a process of establishing the services that the customer requires from a system, the constraint under which it is operated and is developed. Basically, requirements means it is a step of phases and the requirements engineering, in which the services that the customers requires from the system under a certain constraints should be elicited and that must be documented. So requirements is in fact the description of the system services and the constraints. Services it means that what are the needs of the user, and constraints means that what are different logical and business constraints over the product. So these that are generated during the requirements engineering process. In fact, the system services and the constraints are properly documented and this document is generated in the requirement engineering process. Now, types of software requirements. Here we have three different types. Number one, functional requirements. The functional requirements are those requirements which specify direct functionality of the system. The statement of services that the system should provide, that is called the functional requirements. So how the system should react to a particular inputs and how the system should behave in a particular situation. This is called the requirements. So that means that what should be the input to the system, how the system should process the data, and what should be the output of the system. That is called functional requirements. Non-functional requirements are those requirements which sophisticate the system. So these are the constraints on the services or the function offered by the system, such as the timing constraints. Timing constraints here means that schedule constraints, may also it means that performance constraints, constraints on the development process, that that is the development process constraint. For example, it must be developed under the XP model or the spiral model, that is the development process constraint. And standards constraints, standard constraint mean ISO, IEEE or CMMI standards. These are called the non-functional requirements. And the domain requirements, which is the third types of requirements, it includes the information about the domain of the project. So information domains include such information that is relevant to the domain of the application. So domain requirements represents the application domains of the system, which reflects the characteristic of that domain. The domain means that the area of the system. For example, it is artificial intelligence domain, it is the database management system domains, or it is the mobile domains, or it is the robotics domains. All these are called domain requirements. We will explain each and every one in very much detail here. First one was the functional requirements. So functional requirements means that functional requirements part discusses the functionalities required for this from the system. It includes all the functionalities that is delivered to the customers by the system. The system is considered to form a set of high-level functions Fi. For example, Fi means functionality. So I means function 1, function 2. So I may be varies. So each function Fi of the system can be considered as a transformation of a set of input data to corresponding set of the output data. So Fi means that Fi takes the input data, then transform the data in the form of the functionality and produces some useful output. That is called the Fi. Now, if we want to diagrammatically represent the functional requirements, so here there is the inputs. There may be I1, I2, I3 into In inputs. There we specify the functionalities of the system, and then if there are some outputs, so output 1, output 2, up to output n, these are called the outputs. So functional requirements can also be depicted diagrammatically. For example, function Fi is considered as a transformation of a set of inputs data to some corresponding output data. For example, this is the input data. Here we will specify Fi, and this will convert into the output data after processing done by Fi. Now this is the example of the functional requirements. So how we can document the functional requirement? Consider the case of library system. F1 is search book information. Here we will search the book information through our library management system. F1 is the function of searching the book name in the library. So input is the author's name. Author's name means, for example, Robert Lefort is the author of the C++ book. So here we will specify the author name in the form of the input. And output will be the details, author's books, and the location of these books in the library. So when F1 will be executed, it will provide the books details. Books details includes that all sort of the author's books names, other the books which are written by the particular author which we have provided as an input here, and then also the location of these books in the library. It means that all sort of the shelves where these books are located. So here we will provide the list of the books and the location of each books in the form of the list. Okay, non-functional requirements are those requirements which in fact emphasis on the non-functionalities such as the quality attributes. Non-functional requirements sophisticates the functional requirements. Non-functional requirement deals with the characteristics of the system which cannot be expressed as a function, such as the maintainability of the system, portability of the system, usability of the system, etc. So non-functional requirements are the quality attributes of the software product. Non-functional requirements may include reliability issues, concurrency, that is accuracy of the results, then the human computer interface issues, that is the HCI, and constraints on the system implementation. These are called the non-functional requirements. Okay, now here we will discuss non-functional requirements in very much detail. Students, there are three types of non-functional requirements. First one is called the product requirements. Requirement which specify that the delivered product must be behave in a particular way. The first non-functional requirements are called the product requirements. As its name indicates, all those non-functional requirements which are relevant with the products are called the product requirements. The product requirements include execution speed and reliability, etc. For example, execution speed here means that number of operations, number of unit times required to execute the speed, the transaction. For example, one transaction requires 2 nanoseconds, then 10 transaction requires 20 nanoseconds. And also the reliability, it is the example of the non-functional requirements for the product requirements. Reliability means that the system must perform its operation in every time, in every case. So second types of non-functional requirements is called organizational requirements. Organization which are consequence of organizational policies and procedures. So organizational requirements are those non-functional requirements which are relevant to the development organization. It contains the organization policies and procedures, that how we will develop the product and how many people will require to do the development, what sort of the service standards we will follow for the development, and what sort of the life cycle models will be used for the development purpose. For example, process standards used, CMMI ISO standard which are relevant to the organization. Implementation requirements, for example, which technology will be used for the implementation like Java, C++, C Sharp, etc. This is the implementational requirements. External requirements are those requirements which are not the product, not the organization requirement, but these are external to the system. For example, third-party requirements or the government requirements or the legislative requirements. These are called the external requirements. Requirement which arises from factors which are external to the system and its development processes. For example, interoperability requirements. Interoperability means that the products has a good communication with another products or another environments. Legislative requirements means that there are certain law and regulation requirements that we will follow the particular law and regulation, etc. Okay, now this is the tree which represents all sort of the non-functional requirements. As we already discussed, that non-functional requirement is split down into product requirements, organizational requirements, and the external requirements. There are three different types of non-functional requirements. Now, product requirements are split into multiple other non-functional requirements. For example, usability requirements, then we have efficiency requirements, then we have performance requirements and space requirements, and also we have reliability and portability requirements. Now, we will discuss each and every one in a little bit detail. Usability requirements mean the system must be usable by the customers. That means it should be easily used by the customers. Efficiency requirements mean the system should be efficient. But efficiency requirements is split down into two types of requirements: performance requirements and space requirements. Performance requirements is the requirements which are relevant to the efficiency of the softwares, that the system must perform very well in the particular time. Similarly, the space requirements is relevant with the space on the uh, different sort of the media. For example, hard disk is is example of the space. Similarly, RAM is also example of the space. That means how many MB or GB is required to store the softwares, so are installed on the user environment. So, for example, if the system requires very much heavy space on the storage media, then the space requirement will be described. Another product types of requirement is called reliability requirements, that the system should be reliable. It should work in every situation against every sort of threats. Another one is called portability requirement. Portability requirement is this one, that the system should be portable. It can be converted into one format to another. It can be installed in every environment. It can be transformed or transported to everywhere. Similarly, another types of non-functional requirements is called the organizational requirement. Organizational requirements are split down into delivery requirements, implementation requirements, and standard requirements. Delivery requirements means that the system should be delivered within the time schedule, or the system should be delivered on the right schedule. Similarly, implementational requirements include the implementational standard of the product. For example, the system must be implemented in Java, in C++, or in C#.NET. That is the implementational requirements, which is the organizational requirements. Similarly, we have the standard requirements. Standard requirements means ISO, IEEE, CMMI standards. Good softwares have standards. If we are lacking the standards, it cannot be sold in the, we cannot sell them into the international market. So, standard requirements include the standard which we will follow for the development. It includes the IEEE, CMMI, or ISO standards. Dear students, we will continue our lecture uh, later on. So already we have consumed about 16 minutes. So the next slides will be continue, and we will in fact resume our lecture later on. Thank you very much.